Hello, I'm Alexander Sigsworth, also known as Anna Singsward, and I am back interviewing the author who I interviewed for World Book Night of 2021 about his debut novel, Each Little Universe. And since then, he's now published his second solo book, Chronicles from the World of Guilt, which we both have here. He truly is the Aziraphale to my Crowley, my best friend in the whole world. No, you are the Aziraphale to my
I was trying to
Crowley.
work out which way round I thought we ought to be, but yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah, because you're more of the optimist, but I'm a bit more cynical. Yeah.
Fair.
So first of all, even though I'm interviewing you, I just want to talk a little bit about me. Because it's in the acknowledgements here for your beta readers, where you're saying, not to seem less grateful to the others, but Alex and Erin in particular were a great help making this an overall better book in some big ways. So I'm curious, in what ways?
Do you know what? I feel like I should get up the. Here it is. Yeah. So you have. Oh God.
I've
Oh,
no
this is Team's background, just making things disappear. Okay, never mind that then.
now.
I thought I'd be really professional and have like part of the cover art kind of,
Yeah.
but you can't actually see anything, so that's fine. I would say that based on you reading the first time around, obviously there were typos, I'm sure. There were some things that moved and some things that were added to fill gaps, I think, if I remember right. And although weirdly the final product is not that much different from what went out to the beta readers, because a lot of what I got was one person really liked one thing that someone else really disliked. So it was like, oh well, we'll just stick to the middle and say that can stay then, which is absolutely the laziest way of editing, but it's what I did.
Right. Because having only read that initial draft once, I don't really see any differences between that and the final book, really. So
Oh,
I was
there are
just,
things. There are
and
there
I
are
would
stories that
probably
are gone
notice,
entirely, and some that are
were I
new.
to reread that draft, which I actually still have a copy of, but like, why would I? Um, okay, I want to highlight, because at the beginning of each story you have these glyphs, and the artist is probably named somewhere in the book, but I can't be bothered to find that out right now.
Hmm.
Um, so that which I say you understand on page 65.
I'm glad I've got my copy with me because we're already skipping around. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that, if you could call it like a glyph, cipher, whatever it is that what I think it is, or
I
is
want
it
that
not?
to be visible. Depends on what you think it is entirely.
What do you think I think it is?
I don't know. So the art who did the artist who did the I think I referred to them as icons. That see, I'm having to hold the book up really carefully because of what Teams does with the background, so that's probably not even very
Mm,
visible.
no.
But the artist who did the icons that appear kind of at the start of each chapter, his name is Josh. He's on Twitter and Facebook and
Oh,
Instagram as Art of
son of it.
Arklin.
Is
Some
it?
no, yes, but I think he goes on pretty much everywhere. He goes by Art of Arklin these days, Arklin. He's doing some cool things. So I think for each one, I just kind of gave him like a couple of words of what I wanted, and I think for that one, I just said, "Can you do something that's representative of language somehow?" Um,
Mm.
with the knowledge that that was quite a big question, and I didn't really know what he could possibly do for that. But he turned out this little thing, and I rather like it. But I actually do not know what that would be making you think of. Unfortunately, you'll say it, and I'll probably go aha. But
Well, when I read it, it wasn't until I actually initially reread this and I suddenly noticed. Well, I mean, now that you've actually said that, it's clearly not the thing that I think it is, so it doesn't matter.
oh
Um,
no, you can't say that and then not say what the thing is. You have to say
I
what the thing
was
is.
I was thinking I'm just going to hold it, because
Thank you. There you go.
it's probably
That's
better if I
clearer.
do it.
Yeah.
I was thinking that it looks. Now you might be able to see that this is like a sort of Rorschach or whatever, but I actually thought it looked a bit like my initials.
It does look like your initials. You know, as you said that,
Yeah,
I was thinking that's an A and an S, isn't it? Yeah. Um,
yeah, but yeah, because
absolutely. That's
yeah,
yeah.
but
That's why that is.
like that probably says a lot about me that I just looked at this sort of random just assortment of symbols and thought, "Ooh, that's
No,
me."
To be fair,
Yeah,
that is
yeah,
very very
yeah,
much resembling an A and an S.
yeah.
So tell you what, you can have that retroactively. That's what that is.
Okay, cool. We were talking just then about usernames, and I'm just trying to. I think it was the cover artist you were talking about. Hang on.
That'd be
Yeah,
Natasha.
it's. Oh wait, no, it's somebody who. They go by Mythic Comics Art.
Ah, that was actually Josh. He's changed his screen name, which is irritating because now the book is pointing people to the wrong place. Um,
Like your old Twitter username in its little universe.
what was my Twitter? It was
It
yes, it was
was.
Overthinker1, wasn't it? Yeah, and now it's not.
Yeah. Although you've at least set up another name for that just to redirect people, but whatever. Because the funny thing is, all I actually wanted to say about that is that when every time I read it, I never actually see Mythic Comics Art.
What do you
It's
Myth I comic shart?
I keep seeing my thick comics art.
My thick comics art. Yeah, that's
Yeah, like they're drawing like characters who are yeah.
that. Yeah, no, I can see it. This Pen
It's just
Island
one
all
of
over
those things.
again.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's suddenly just occurred to me that I still haven't yet actually explained to the reader what this book is about.
I mean, good
But
luck
then,
with that.
I mean, yeah. Although to be honest, this is part of a press internet tour thing you're doing, so it's like I can put stuff in the description. Frankly, I'd rather just talk to you rather than just doing the typical chat show thing of saying of picking up the card in front of me saying, oh, and it's a book about, and then pointing saying, oh yeah, it's a very good book which I haven't read, but I wanted to
Yeah,
have you on the show. Yeah.
I will
So
very quickly say so for the uninitiated.
yeah.
It's basically it begins with the end of the world and the space whale apocalypse, and then things just kind of get weirder from there over time, and that's kind of the best way I can think of describing it.
Yeah, and then it does truly defy description, but that's what I like about it because it's like a. This might sound, I don't know how this might sound, but it's like a sort of book. You know, it's like, you know what I
Is
mean
this the
by
kind
that?
of like a writer's writer or a musician's musician sort of thing?
Well, in the sense that, and I said this in my review of Its Little Universe, that you're not the sort of writer who thinks I've got this film in my head, so I'm just going to sort of write the novelization of the film. Instead, you
Mm.
think this is like a book. You could only do this as a book. Yeah,
Yes,
because
yeah, I think so. I think you
yeah,
probably could, if there are any TV executives watching, you could absolutely do a TV show of it. But I think that what was in the show would have to be vastly different than what was in the book. I think is what, like
yeah,
you,
it's
yeah. I don't know. I guess my feeling on it is if you're going to make something, then you should probably make something that could only be done that way. Like this is why I really like good video games, right? Like a good video game to me is a game that doesn't work as anything else. Like the kind of the nature of a game as being something that the player inhabits um,
I
is something you can't really
suppose
replicate. So
what is it I'm thinking of? Oh, the game BioShock.
that's probably the classic example. Yeah, that would
Yeah.
not work half as well if it were anything else. Although doubtless someone's trying to film it right now.
Yeah. Um, okay, so if you would kindly refer back to that story we were just talking about, that which I say you understand,
Yeah,
which is about I'm not entirely sure if there's a term to actually describe the thing that it's describing, but it's sort of the purification of of thought or ideas into a sort of universal. It's see that's the thing about this book. It's as soon as I actually try to describe it and explain it, it's difficult. Um, you may have to help me out.
okay,
Um,
so I
yeah,
remember what the idea from this one came from, and I can't remember what it's called, so I'm trying to Google it.
right.
Um, right, okay, so there's there's a thing called an information hazard, which actually I think is the title of a piece later in the book,
The
funnily
one
enough.
about the museum.
That's the one about the painting in the museum, yeah. But
Yeah.
so an information hazard broadly is something that is just being aware of it is sufficient to do damage.
You mean like
Um,
this man,
this man?
the creepypasta? This man.
Oh yes, I that sounds familiar. There's
Yeah.
I think there was a basilisk put forward at some point as well, like the idea of a
Oh
basilisk,
yes, the
like
basilisk.
the basilisk that if you thought about it, it would end the world or something, right? Something like that.
Because the world is actually a simulation, and that's a sort of glitch generated by the simulation. And if you're aware of it, then the information is there for you to be able to perceive it.
Yeah, and
I'm forgetting the name of it. Ah,
I think it, yeah, okay. If this is the one I'm thinking of, which it might not be, um, the basilisk thing showed up on like a rationalization argument where a rationality forum that was something to do with skimming. Oh, here we go. Okay, a sufficiently powerful AI agent could torture anyone who imagined it but didn't actively work to bring it into existence. So, if you become aware of, let's call it the basilisk, and you know exactly what it is, then you know that you have to bring it into existence or it will torture you. And then it does torture you purely because you know it exists.
yeah.
It's an odd thing to say. But anyway, I think the post got banned on the forum just in case it was true. Like they were like, not because there was any serious credence to give to the idea that it was, but just like
Yeah.
on principle, it's a bad idea to encourage people to try and do this thing. So anyway, so the idea of this language that I kind of think about in that which I say you understand is basically that it's a language that you can immediately understand, that anyone can immediately understand on seeing, hearing, whatever, because it's not. So most languages work either through phonetics, i.e., you kind of translate a sound to a letter, or what's the one? Oh, semi. See, this is bad. But I can't
Semiotics.
actually remember the word. I don't think it's semi something. Anyway,
Semiotics.
semiotics is to do with the study of science. I can't remember whether that's what I.
Oh, of course. Yes. I was trying to impress you, and I never was.
No, it's a similar word. Okay, so some languages, I'm basically just reading from the book now, which feels really odd
yes.
to be like kind of essentially reading for myself. But some written languages phonetically represent words, i.e., you translate them into sounds. Some languages use pictograms, so they're kind of semantic, i.e., what you're reading isn't necessarily to do with sound. But this language that exists in the book is neither of those things. What you see directly corresponds to meaning immediately in your head, and obviously, like that's a really odd thing to try and wrap your mind around. But like, you literally cannot help but comprehend it immediately. And so the writer of the piece in there goes on to hypothesize that someone could express a concept in that language that would be so detrimental just to have in your head, right? Because if you perfectly understood it, it could do you an awful lot of damage straight away just by you understanding
Yeah.
it. And I think that's really interesting, and I really hope it's not of practical use. Like I don't think that can actually happen, but I think it's kind of like it's kind of an epistemological and a linguistic thing all in one, and it's the idea that those things could directly affect the world in kind of a really interesting way, I think.
And the reason that I'm sort of so fixated on this one story is because this is like, and I'm trying to think of the word that means like one thing that represents the greater system that it's a part of. Like not
Microcosm?
possibly, yeah, maybe sort of synecdoche or something like that.
Oh,
But
yeah, that's
basically,
yeah.
yeah, this is the story is that really summarizes the rest of the book in terms of the style and the tone and what you're going for, because it's completely indescribable and you only understand it as soon as you're reading it, but when you're not reading it you have no way of vocalizing it or understanding it.
Weirdly, that's actually kind of fitting for the subject matter then. And that's quite a nice way of putting it. I like that.
Exactly. I mean, it's like you've sort of taken this idea for a whole bunch of stuff in your head and distilled it down so perfectly into exactly the form it needs to have that actually trying to put any more words onto it as description is impossible, if you know what I mean.
I mean that's very kind. Thank you. I don't have a good reaction to a compliment like that, but I appreciate it.
Yeah. also, this one in particular, as well as the places I've seen, which is the one about the big tower that sort of goes on
So
forever.
yeah, other places it's kind of I think that one was slightly indulgent. Maybe it's sort of a way for me to explore a few places that. So basically, as the world gets progressively stranger, physical laws become a bit looser, and weirder locations can happen. So I
Yeah,
think that one is kind of a almost a whistle stop tour of like some of the things that I imagine without having to actually dedicate the space to visiting them. And I think if I were able to do like a kind of further thing in the world, I think some of those places maybe I would spend more time actually visiting, because yeah, basic it's almost like an info dump of me just saying, look, these places do exist in this world that I've made, but I'm not going to show them to you. I'm just going to tell you about them for a bit, but
yeah.
nevertheless.
The thing is, those two stories are the ones that I was reading, and I was thinking, I wonder how much these were influenced by Ted Chiang.
Um, so I don't think I actually read Ted Chiang until after writing most of Guilt, weirdly. Or I might have read some of his stuff, but I definitely didn't. I have a collection of his stuff, which I'm looking at right now, and I definitely didn't read that until afterwards. Um, Ted Chiang is such a fantastic short story writer. Like he is brilliant at that thing you just described of like doing things that only really work in that format. Like form and function are very much intertwined in a way that I really like. So I mean, I mean, again, I really appreciate the compliment of being compared to him, but yeah, I can't claim unfortunately that it was deliberate because I didn't read him until afterwards. But yeah.
What I was thinking of is the one that he wrote, and you did a book talk about this, and I then read the book, his short story collection. It was the one that was his version of the Tower of Babel.
Yes, which is very, very similar to the Endless Tower, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it goes up and up forever and down not forever. I think was how his works. Although in his spoilers, I think the end of it is that someone does get to the top and then actually has to kind of climb out of the ground into somewhere above, or possibly the same place all over again.
Yeah. Going further
Am I lying about this? Did
into,
I read that before? Because that's so. Maybe I did read it
well,
before, and that was just
I
stealing. I don't know.
I read a draft of this before I interviewed you about Each Little Universe, and
Yeah.
that was early 2021.
Yes.
And I don't know if that tells you anything.
I'm gonna look on Goodreads at when I read it.
Yeah.
When did I read it? Okay, I read it in 2020.
Right.
So that might overlap actually, because I wrote most of Guilt in early 2020, so there might be some overlap there.
Yeah. So this would have been written during lockdown, would it
Yeah.
not? How much did the pandemic influence the book? Because I said in my review at the time, it's this thing which has completely changed our lives and the way that we're thinking about things and the world, and it's about the way that people react, and it's very sociological and anthropological.
Um,
Were you thinking about that consciously?
Not a huge amount. I think the only conscious reference to it is right at the start when Guilt shows up, which is the name that people give to the giant space whale. Um, it There's a reference to the fact that it comes at a time when people are more dependent on like Wi-Fi and that kind of thing than usual. Like the world is connected primarily at that point through the internet and stuff rather than through people seeing each other physically. And I think that's the one kind of throwaway reference to almost locating it in time, like this is happening now. And I think the reason I mentioned that is because it kind of allowed this thing where Guilt's first children, who are giant metal dragons, by the way, and I don't talk about them enough because they're giant metal dragons. Everybody, they come down and they basically take out as many hotspots of internet activity as possible, thus kind of severing the world's communities from each other, like and making it harder to communicate across distances. Um, and so I think that was definitely with lockdown in mind, thinking, oh my gosh, if we lost like the internet now, we would be so much more separated than we were before. Um, and I think the internet, though it's not perfect, has done a lot of good through a lot of things, but especially through lockdown. And then I think I do think there's something in the idea that I was probably thinking more than usual about a thing happening that just changes everything, and that the world goes on and people react to it in their own ways and they carry on living their lives, but with in the shadow of that. But the bigger influence on it is definitely a video by a YouTuber called MC Prophet who talked about sin in
Yes.
Final Fantasy X, and sin is absolutely what I've ripped Guilt off of, because sin is a giant whale creature that is in the sky
Yeah.
and everyone knows it's there and they're trying to live their lives in spite of it.
I've got Final Fantasy X 10.2 HGV Master in my Steam library, but I haven't started it yet. But as soon as I get to it, I'll let you know.
Yeah, so I think the difference I think is that sin is actually much more of a, it's kind of mythological, but it turns out to be very much a physical creature that someone can go and hit enough times to kill, because it's Final Fantasy. Um, but nevertheless, the idea I think was that there's this thing that is so big and kind of unreachable, but everyone is living their lives in its shadow, and it's kind of how do people go on, having lives doing that? Because you have to have hope and beauty as well as terror and just abject shitting yourself.
Yeah. The thing is, though, I think every generation probably thinks it's special enough to witness the end of the world, but they never do. Do you not think?
So far, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the whole point of We Did Start the Fire.
Mm.
There's always something people think is the end of the world, but it never is. And we always think that there's this big shadow being cast over us, but actually it's just another passing thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess until the heat death of the universe, everything technically will be a passing thing, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time.
Well, I mean, assuming that what doesn't happen then is that the universe contracts and then explodes again, and then the entire thing repeats itself exactly as it already happened before.
Well, yeah, my theory about this is that I'm not a physicist at all, but like from a very unscientific understanding, like if time is a dimension and the three main spatial dimensions that we know about are expanding, is what we experience as the forward progression of time, just the dimension of time expanding. So when the universe contracts again, time might go backwards.
You
But
mean like that Red Dwarf episode?
I, this is where my pop culture. I have seen most of Red Dwarf, but a long time ago.
Okay.
I don't have time to rewatch things that I saw a long time ago because I have a baby.
Because you're what?
Because I have a baby and a job and
Oh,
stuff.
yeah. I'm surprised you found the time to do this.
Well, this is technically during. Don't tell anyone during working hours, but if it's fine.
Okay, right. Okay, so a menagerie all in one, which was that influenced in any way by Annihilation?
Yes,
Excellent.
definitely. So
Good.
okay, so um, around the time I started writing Guilt, I got super into Jeff Vandermeer and China Mieville and kind of new weird stuff. Um, and actually, there are multiple other things in the book that are influenced directly by things that are in the Annihilation trilogy. Which what's the Southern Reach? The Southern Reach trilogy. Of which Annihilation is the first book. But yeah. So Menagerie, I think, was the second story I wrote, and at that time, it wasn't part of this bigger thing. I think I'd written, weirdly enough, Titanfell, which is one of the last stories in there, was the first thing I wrote. And at the time, I didn't know what Guilt was. I just thought it was kind of a fun. I think I wrote like the first 1,000 words or so of it, just as this like weird conversation between people who are going to go and hunt a thing. And um, so Guilt kind of came out of that. And then Menagerie, I was like, I want to do this sort of body horror thing, but with animals doing crazy morphing things. Um, and then I was reading Tales of Lunas Aquaria by Tessa Hasjayanto, whose surname I've definitely said wrong. But so the idea that maybe these short stories could all be in one place and be connected kind of came out of that. So that's kind of the progression of the ideas, I think, from like reading slash watching Annihilation and other new weird stuff through writing a couple of stories that turned out to be similar themes, and then oh heck, this could all be one collection.
You also read Moon Sitting by E.M. Harding as well.
I did, and that was, yeah, that's not so much the overall thing, but that was
Yes.
the,
Yeah.
the story My Friend the Moon is like the story that I thought Moon Sitting was going to be from the blurb, but I just completely misread the blurb. So basically, what I did there is I took EM's idea that I had misunderstood and wrote the story that I thought it was going to be. It turned out, it's a weird kind of plagiarism, right? Like I have completely stolen the idea, but it wasn't actually the idea. It was my misunderstanding.
I said at the time that I thought moon sitting was like an analogy for drug addiction and codependency. Was it, or is that just how it ended up
Um,
reading for me?
that's not something I know enough about to have done on purpose, I don't think.
Right.
I I think maybe there's so my friend the moon is about a guy who is it's from his perspective, and he's very clearly kind of an unreliable or slightly unhinged narrator, and he is obsessed with his friend who is the moon, but it's just a little ball that lives in his apartment. So it's like, what do you mean it's the moon? And the moon kind of becomes a little bit cosmic horror-y, which I think there's some probably Bloodborne, even Doctor Who. There was the episode where the moon was an egg. I think that probably influenced it a bit.
Do not ask me about that.
I
Do not ask me about kill the fucking moon. Seriously, don't.
I will ask no questions about that. Anyway,
Oh God.
I think the moon's kind of a creepy thing. Oh, Majora's Mask as well, of course, a big smiling moon doing creepy things.
Yeah. Yeah. The
But
five stages of grief.
yeah. So this guy is kind of completely obsessed with the moon and his opinions that are completely unsupported of what he thinks it wants him to do and how he thinks they're friends and stuff, which turns out to be pretty deadly for everybody involved.
Okay. So sort of like an analogy for maybe politics or something.
You can
I'm
have
the
you
moon.
can
I
read that if you
protect
want.
you. I'm your friend. I'm not gonna devour you. Just
I
let
mean,
me
yeah,
into your life.
it is kind of one of those relationships that is certainly unhealthy. I mean, I think this guy is reading into, like, the moon is just a ball, right? But he's reading into it that it wants all this stuff, and whether that comes from him or from the moon affecting him, we don't really know. I would say I think you are very astute at picking up on themes that I am probably uh, not necessarily aware of at the time. I think sometimes I have themes in mind, and sometimes, especially when it's a lot of stories like this, some of them are just going to be, I thought this was a cool idea.
You do tend to accidentally write good books. If
Thank you.
that's not an insult.
I don't know, but I'll take it.
Okay. Yeah. Um. So Stephen Bartensteer is pretty much the one character who has a sort of who tends to be present in multiple stories. I mean, there are
He
some characters who are referenced in multiple stories, but he's the
he's
only
the longest
one.
runner, yeah.
Yeah. Were you thinking that you needed to have one character who was developing more through the whole thing, or did that just come about organically?
So Stephen Bartonstay is another direct rip-off of Jeff Vandermeer, weirdly. Um,
Okay,
so
now I see it. Yeah.
in one of the Southern Reach books, and it might be Annihilation or it might not, I can't remember. There's this. Oh, this is another flipping place I've seen. There's a lighthouse, but it goes into the ground, and the characters kind of go increasingly down it. And there's a thing in there called the Crawler, which kind of looks very much like how Stephen is described as looking after he's been through an awful lot later on. Um, so Stephen first appears in what's called the first era of guilt, which is kind of when the world is still broadly the same, but guilt is a thing. Um, and he decides to eat a bit of guilt, which promptly drives him uh, not very happy. Um, and then yeah, so he appears a couple of times after that, and I think the reason he pops back is just because I thought it would be nice to have some sort of thing that endures, um, other than guilt itself, because guilt is kind of the only thing that connects the stories otherwise. Um, and like Steven's not a massive player in most of what happens, but I feel like he's really, it must suck to be him, right? Because like he's around for a good 100,000, not 100,000, but a few hundred or a few thousand years after he becomes this horrible, abominable thing and clearly hates it. Um, and then just gets to, I don't know. I think I quite like the idea that he pops back up much later and just sort of demonstrates that he's been here this whole time suffering. Like the world's gone on without him, and he's just been here having an absolutely horrible time of it. Poor Stephen.
Yeah. there is a sort of thread that runs through the book of the human race is actually kind of terrible in the way people react, and there are people trying to profit from it, and there are people trying to just con people, and there's a lot of it's quite cynical about human nature.
Yeah,
Was that deliberate?
probably. I would say I like people individually, but I often don't like humanity as a collective.
Mm,
Um,
yes.
and I think do you know what, this might have been a COVID thing as well. I think that the amount of people that tried to make some personal gain off of the tragedy that the world was going through, I did not like very much at all. And so yeah, there's a couple of instances of people kind of very consciously trying to turn a profit off people's suffering, and that kind of thing. And I think that I think are usually juxtaposed with someone who is more not necessarily the same story. So the example I'm thinking of at the moment is the guy who tries to go and kill the whales to sell their flesh and their blubber and all that and profit off that. He to me is kind of the opposite of, I think his name's Beren in The Storm of the Sea, which is a story where
Yes.
two guys get swept out to sea and they come across this pod of whales, and their only experience of whales or things that look like them is guilt. So they're initially terrified, and then they realize, wait, no, these are just awesome creatures living their lives, and we should just kind of, we don't have to be involved in that. We can just appreciate that. And so I think that's kind of the mentality that I would rather people have. Like, if there are beautiful things to be found somewhere, then just kind of appreciate those without trying to make them yours or do something for profit. And that I feel like is something that I probably do think about in other places outside of guilt too. Certainly there's a couple of things that I've got kind of on the back burner that I can think of that are to do with just sort of appreciating the world for what it is rather than trying to do things for your own gain out of it. Yeah.
I have to admit, I still get confused between Beren and Sperry.
Yeah, one's an uncle and one's a nephew. Baron's the older one, I think.
Yeah.
Is it because they sound similar?
Probably.
Baron, Sperry, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've said this before, but they actually remind me of Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson in The Lighthouse. So, although mainly that's because Willem Dafoe's character is so archetypal with the big beard and the pipe and everything. So, I don't know.
Yeah, he's Captain Birdseye in my head.
Okay, right. That is honestly not something I would ever have guessed.
What I mean, I've added like the pipe and stuff, but like facially, he is Captain Birdseye in my head.
Okay. Yeah,
Not necessarily personality wise. He's not out there, talking about fish fingers or whatever.
yeah. It's not really until towards the end that people decide to start doing something about guilt. The rest of it is just them dealing with, just sort of responding to it. But it's not until later on that people decide maybe we actually ought to tackle the problem somehow.
Yeah, um, I think it's only at that point that people think that it might even be possible. Like, I think the shock of this thing existing is so much that I think there might be like a brief reference to attempts to like shoot conventional missiles at it or something. But I think with the fact that uh, most of the world has been kind of disabled from its usual functions, that probably wasn't particularly doable. But yeah, so it's only later on when guilt becomes a thing that people kind of feel like they understand more as a thing rather than as an event. I think, like, at first it's sort of guilt has happened to us and we just have to live with that. And yeah, doubtless people would have wanted to do something about it, but I think it would have been so far away that that would just have died pretty quickly. So it's only later on when it gets a bit, it starts flying lower for one thing. Like, gradually over time it just gets closer and closer to the earth. I think it just gets older and more tired. And yeah, I think people having had lifetimes to think that they understand it in some sense, they start thinking maybe we can actually, maybe it's a creature that we can attack rather than an unknowable entity that's, well, barely even entity. It's guilt in my head is more the setting than the character, right? Like, it's not really a character. It doesn't do very much. It's more of an aspect of the world.
Something that I really took from this is that, in a way, it's a really good example of how the writing process can be sometimes. That you have all these ideas and these thoughts in your brain about something not necessarily specific that you don't yourself understand, and you just write it, and it's just, well, this is how I'm processing all this stuff. This is what it's going to come out as.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell myself to take it or leave it. I'm going to tell myself it is what it is. There we are, and someone else will tell me what it's about.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of that. I always like the idea that people find their own meaning and stuff. I don't know if I completely subscribe to death of the author, but
We
I think an
talked about
author's
this last time.
we did.
Let's
Did I
not
say
go there.
did I say something
It
to the
was a
effect that
good
I think an
laugh.
author's I was talking about someone
Yes.
specific, wasn't I? But I think I said
Yes,
something to
we
the I
were.
think I said something to the effect that the author's opinion is an opinion on the text, the same as anyone else's, but like it doesn't ontologically it doesn't have any specific weight to it over other people's after the
Yeah.
book's out there.
The weird thing is the it's often the readers who are more likely to tell you that the author's opinion is the only one that matters, and the author is more likely to be the one that says actually the reader's opinion is just as valid.
That actually
Yeah,
sounds, yeah. I've not
because
noticed that,
the
but that's true.
writer is the one who understands the artistic process because they're the one who did it, whereas the reader hasn't.
Yeah, maybe there's some kind of privileged access to like the process. I think with something like guilt, I'm way more aware that I don't know everything about the world. Like it's not like I've filled in every gap and I don't want to. Like guilt appears and then thereafter the entire world changes, but I've only kind of zoomed in on a few small bits of that. And all the other people left in the world are still living their lives in other places doing other things. And I don't, yeah, I always want to leave the rest of the world to kind of be on its own. So like if other people want to fill in those gaps, like I feel like the world is there to do that, and I don't necessarily own the entire thing. I just have the bits that I've looked at, if that makes sense. I mean, that almost sounds like I'm trying to crowdsource it or something, but I don't know. I guess I'm just very aware that like I know that the world of guilt exists, but I have not been to much of it.
In a way, writing is kind of like, especially with fantasy world building, it's a bit like cartography. That you're charting the territory of the story just as much as the world literally, and
Yeah,
that
for
you're
sure.
sort of you're filling in the map as you go, but you don't actually need to. There are going to be limits to your own knowledge of it.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Well, I think this
I
you can do it either way, right? Like someone like George R.R. Martin, right, admits, I think, that he does the story and then kind of invents the places around the story. Like he invents a couple of words of Dothraki where he needs someone to speak Dothraki. Someone like Tolkien does the world building first, and that almost becomes the whole story. Like, so he has these places already for people to go to. We don't have to get into this, but like someone like Tolkien invents the world so that the places are there for the story to explore, rather than the other way around, which is like I could never do that because I'm just sheer methodologically my brain does not work that way. But so my approach to world building, such that it is that I kind of do the story, the narrative, and then the world kind of pops into place around that as it needs to. Does that make sense?
yeah. My process is pretty much the same. So
I think it's sometimes
yeah,
it's then easier to go in and try and work out what some of that context might be afterwards, right? Like if I know,
yeah.
for example, that in in a story in Guilt, there's this endless tower, then I know that at some point that was either built or popped up, and I could go back and tell you exactly what year that was and how it happened and who did it and why. But I don't. That tends not to be the way I tell stories at the moment. Although I'd quite like to give it a go at some point and just see whether it works for me. Don't think it will.
Yeah, yeah. When I finished this, I got the impression, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and make an assumption that you were probably in set one for English.
Is set one the high one?
It's the highest class. Jesus, are you that much older than me? Is that a more recent thing? Did they not have sets?
Well, so my
When...
school apparently was not so. So for one thing, I went to the school system where I am changed massively when I went to high school. So it was
Right.
first, middle, and high, and then as I went into what would have been high school, suddenly it became primary and secondary, which I think the rest of the country was doing the whole time. So my kind of schooling experience, I don't think is massively representative of everyone else's, even though it was just kind of a normal school, as far as I know.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, to answer the question, yeah, I was in the highest ability set for English. I Whether I think ability sets, I have thoughts on grouping people by ability in education. I think pedagogically, I'd be interested to learn more about that. But
What does that mean pedagogically?
pedagogy is to do with teaching and learning
Right.
and education.
You do this every time. You say a word and I don't know what it means, and then I feel stupid.
But then
But
you're like, is this a reference to this? And I'm like, I don't even know what that is.
the thing is, right, you are genuinely the only person I know who is smarter than me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I
So,
Yeah, cool. Okay, no, that there's a whole other like 4 hour conversation about what it means to be smart. I think my worry is that because I'm very good, and I hope this isn't kind of blowing my trumpet too much, but I'm quite good at coming across as if I know what I'm talking about. Which means that I always did well academically, right? Because most of academia is looking at, do they seem like they know what they're talking about? Like, as weird as that sounds, like you can kind of fake it till you make it. Um,
yeah.
but the danger with that is that when people talk to me and get this assumption that I do in fact know what I'm talking about, maybe they're right half the time, but they're probably wrong the other half the time, and there's no way for any of us to tell the difference. So I think always be cautious of every individual claim.
Sometimes I wonder whether you can actually keep up with your own brain.
About half the time I'm kind of having a nice time with it, and the other half I'm like, please stop. So, yeah,
Okay.
no. I guess
Yeah.
all of this to say is I don't necessarily think of myself as like super intelligent. I think there are some things I can appear to be good at, and I think that's almost the only thing that matters a lot of the time. But yeah.
I see. Um,
Sorry, if you're hoping for some kind of like smart person solidarity,
no, no. I'm I'm trying to think of what else to say next, and I've just had this idea about the Dunning-Kruger effect.
yeah, that comes into it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think pretty much. Still, there's so much to dissect with this. I'm just wondering where do I possibly go next with it? Uh, hmm.
I'm just gonna skim through and see what we've got.
Yeah.
Oh, shall I tell you one of my favorites? Actually,
Yeah. Sure.
I think it's the shortest one. It's called Lost Time.
Ooh, Lost Time is so good. It is such a good one. I love Lost Time.
So
Yes.
I'm kind of
Ah,
I have an idea for a longer story on the same theme that is much more Ted Chiang-y because it would be to do with kind of modern technology. But yeah, I should
right.
explain what Lost Time is about, shouldn't I?
Um, it, yeah, you may as well. I'll trust
So,
you to do that because I probably wouldn't be able to do it as well as you.
well, like I said, it is the shortest one in there. I'm fairly sure, and it's about a person who I think that so okay, so they're 21 at the start of the story, and for the first time they're going to be in the shadow of guilt, which is this thing that changes things in all kinds of weird ways. And the only thing it does to this person is that the next thing they know, they're like 75, 73, and they remember everything that happened to them up to that point, the whole life that they lived, but they just have this knowledge that they weren't actually there to experience it. They've just kind of skipped forwards. And there's something so weird about that. And I don't know, this idea is something I think about quite a lot. Sometimes I think like when things are hard, sometimes I think, man, wouldn't it be great to be able to skip to the point where this is over? And then I think, no, that would be so weird to have lived through it, but not to have had the the experience of being in it, and that kind of really weirds me out.
It's kind of like I suppose Once in a Lifetime,
Is that a movie?
the song,
Oh,
where all of a sudden one day you just gain sentience and you realize I spent all this time actually not really being alive, and it's only now that I've actually woken up.
yeah. Oh, is that the one about "This Is Not My Beautiful House" or whatever? This is My
Yeah,
Beautiful Life.
like
Yeah.
I know all this stuff happened because I was there, but I was just sort of on autopilot the whole time.
Yes,
And
exactly. Funny enough,
yeah,
the short story I'm playing with is tentatively titled "Life on Autopilot." But yeah, it's I think there's some truth to the idea that we can sometimes be aware that we lived through things, but not have felt like we were really there to experience them. And I find the notion of experience really odd sometimes. Like there's in philosophy, there's a thing called qualia, right, which is the direct notion of kind of immediately experiencing something that's completely irreducible and irreplaceable. Like even if you could see through my eyes and live in my memories, like you would be doing it as you, not as me. Like there's something so complex and unchangeable about just being who you are at that moment. And something that really gets to me actually is the idea that one day I will have that experience where I'm like about to die and aware that that's my, like, in the same way that I feel that I'm here right now, I will probably feel, oh, this is me coming to an end now. That fucks with me, right? That really fucks with me. But yeah, the idea that you can kind of realize that you weren't really there experiencing things, I think is something that we all probably feel at some point. I know I do, and then I really regret it a lot of the time. But yeah,
see, when you talk about philosophy, I never have a good response to it.
sorry.
You know, because our conversations are. I feel like right now, as we're doing this, we're like TM and Asta in those flashbacks. You're just talking about some weird shit that is probably interesting if only I could understand it, and I'm just there like, yeah, that's right, yeah,
I'm
it is,
sorry.
isn't it?
Yeah, no, I'm aware that I try and say things in a way that people will understand. I'm aware that sometimes I don't, and that's
Yeah.
absolute that by the way is no indication that I'm smarter than anyone else. It's just that I have spent time thinking about these things already, and expressing them is difficult.
Speaking of philosophy, there's a character in here whose name is Kierkegaard.
Yep.
And there's no way I can imagine that not being consciously inspired by Kierkegaard.
So Kierkegaard is in there with. Is there a Spencer in there as well, who is possibly Spinoza? And I think there's a Porter there as well, who might
Right?
be. I can't remember what Porter reference to. All three of the main people in that are, yeah, Kierkegaard is the most obvious one to look at. It is obviously Kierkegaard. But Spencer, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure, is Spinoza. Porter, I can't remember who that's a reference to, and I'm annoyed by that because I should know.
Right. So you did like Jack Derrida once and you thought, I'm going to do it again.
Yep.
Oh, right. That is exactly what happened then.
Although Kierkegaard just happens to be called that for kind of, I guess, thematic reasons rather than Jack Derrida's name being like Derrida
Yeah.
makes being called Derrida almost their entire identity.
Who was the philosopher who imagined the perfect island?
Oh lordy. I don't know. I probably should. I don't.
But you understand what I'm talking about here. There's a perfect island. I can imagine it. Therefore, it exists somewhere.
Well, this is not even for the existence of God, right? This is the ontological
Yeah,
argument.
yeah. If I can imagine God, therefore he must exist.
Well, kind of. So the ontological argument, which, oh god, that was one of Anselm's five, but people have refined it a bunch since the 1600s or whatever Anselm was. It basically says I can conceive of a being who is impossibly perfect, and a necessary condition of perfection is existence. And so to be perfect, God must exist, right? And because I know God is perfect, 'cause I can imagine him, he must actually exist, because if he didn't exist, then he wouldn't be perfect.
Right.
I
Because
have
I
a
was
lot of
thinking,
problems with that.
well, I mean, a lot of the stuff I know about philosophy, I'm just taking from Crash Course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because with guilt, it's like if you can imagine guilt, there is a possibility that guilt can exist somewhere in space.
Um, I don't know that being able to imagine it has anything to do with its existence necessarily, but like it could, because guilt existing is not kind of a condition on guilt's nature, but that's kind of true for trivially true for everything, right? Like if you can imagine anything, and given that the cosmos is infinite, there's a non-zero chance of it existing somewhere or something similar.
Yeah. Oh, what is it? That
That
Nibiru, the planet.
that's oh yes. Why is that? What's that from?
Yeah, the 11th planet, or the 10th planet in this. How many fucking planets are there in the solar system? 9,
8, not
8.
including Pluto.
Okay, so like there could be a 9th planet in the solar system that we
Yeah,
can't detect because it's so small and it's hidden behind like Jupiter or something.
yeah.
So for all we know, there could actually be a giant space whale.
Could well be. There could be a teapot floating around the Earth.
Yeah, I knew you were going to talk about the teapot, and I don't know who came up with that.
That was
But
Bertrand Russell. I do know that one.
yes, Bertrand Russell. The only thing that will redeem mankind is cooperation. Thank you, Shaun of
That's a
the Dead.
wonderful note actually to talk about. Yeah,
Yes, particularly in regards to the book. The only way they bring down guilt is by all cooperating with each other.
yeah. Even though it doesn't
Well,
work all the time.
sometimes, though, cooperating is just doing what League thinks they should do.
Yeah,
Why?
league's idea of corporations.
Why is he called League? Did you think about that, or did it just sound cool?
Um, so because I think he was literally the first character that I named in this whole thing, and at the time I didn't know it was part of a bigger collection, and I thought the word sounded cool and it evoked kind of distance, and he was kind of going a long way to. I'm not sure.
Right, I
Also,
see.
weirdly, a connection that I've just made is Keith Richards' character in Pirates of the Caribbean 3 is called Captain Teague, isn't he? And that's one letter off from
Is
League,
he? I've no idea.
and League wears a pirate hat, so maybe that's got something to do with it.
A three-cornered hat.
Yes, Tricorn.
Yes, that. And there's a little cipher of that by
Mhm.
Is that by
That's Josh. Yeah.
Josh? Okay, yeah. There's so much to keep up with, but yeah, I mean, Titanfall is one I really liked because this is it's a short story that feels like it's an extract of a much longer, much bigger story, and that I'm jumping in halfway through and then like leaving halfway through, and I just got the impression that there was a lot more under the surface, even though that's probably more in the way that it was written, and that there actually isn't, if you know what I mean.
I guess there kind of is and there isn't, in the sense that so Titanfell is one of the very last stories, and it is one of the only ones I think where like doing something about guilt is kind of the priority. And so it's one of the only ones that feels like it's part of an overarching narrative, right? The rest of it is just stuff that happens on its own that happens to be in this world that guilt exists in. Titanfell is directly to do with guilt, so it's one of the only ones that feels like, oh, something like this whole thing is coming together into something, I think. So I kind of I think I know what you mean by that. It sort of feels like part of a bigger narrative because it's one of the few ones that sort of very openly is, and
Mm.
also I think just the tone of it kind of just feels like there could be more to explore in that region. I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. See, the thing is, so little of League is actually described, and so I'm wondering why is he such an interesting character? Because I know so little about him. On paper, this character is actually thinly written, and there's very little detail. What? What? And you
Oh, I
don't tell
just
us anything about him, and
yeah.
yeah, he's just what? Why is he the most interesting character when he's the one that I know the least about?
I don't know. I think he's kind of an archetypical like swashbuckler almost a little bit, right? And so that you've got that kind of context to draw on. I think, but no, the reason I laughed was just because it's a wonderful backhanded compliment. I think to say this character is in theory he's thinly written and yet I like him.
Yeah, you're sort of breaking the rules. That's what I like about it. You know?
I don't know if that's deliberate. I think I think most of the characters in here are technically quite thinly written, but that's because they inhabit really short stories. Like so, very few of them have time to get fleshed out. I think League is one of the few people who you really get a sense could actually do something about the whole thing, which is mostly just because of his own possibly ill-owned confidence. But yeah,
Yeah. I remember at the time I said that his dialogue was much more interesting to read when I imagined that he was Matt Smith,
I
and
can see that.
I don't know why he's the actor that I think of. I guess because it's sort of he just sort of stumbles his way into things and sort of his entire character is sort of like achievement in ignorance, which we talked about last time.
Yes, yes, it very much is.
Yeah.
No, I can see the Matt Smith thing though. He's got interesting diction and kind of a slightly like accidentally charismatic kind of physicality. It's
Yeah. Achievement in ignorance, I think, describes perhaps your entire writing style.
Yes, whether it describes me is another question, but certainly it describes a lot of the things that happen in the things that I write. Yeah.
Now I'm just trying to think of a good outro.
Well, I tell you what. I mean, this is a massive spoiler, but like the very last image of the book is that from kind of an awful lot of suffering and an awful lot of shit comes beauty and kind of new hope, and it doesn't lessen the fact that what came before was shit. It doesn't invalidate that everyone had a horrible time, but it does mean that you're moving forwards, and that's nice. And I feel like that's a nice I don't know, I like it as an ending image, even though it's probably massively derivative.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It felt like it was the only way it could end. I don't know.
I should briefly mention the other places that you'll have been and are going on this thing.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I know myself.
Yeah, since we're still down to the wire with this, I honestly haven't been keeping track of any of it. But
So I can say that this has been this is part of a tour that escapist book tours. I was in my head it's always escapist, but I don't think it is. And I believe I can tell you the stops. Well, just I mean, just follow me on Twitter is probably the easy thing to do. And I will share those. But I'm going to the Fantasy Review, somewhere called Beneath a Thousand Skies, Fan Fight Addict, Fiction Fans Podcast Blog, and Fazilla Reads. So I'm going to a few places.
Yeah. How did that come about? This thing.
I asked them to organise it, and they did.
Oh, it was that simple.
Yep.
I might have to do that myself then.
What am I seeing?
Oh my god.
What the hell is that?
It looks like a whale. It's an alien! Is it an angel?
It's a god.
It's punishment for our sins.
I don't know what it is, but it's not a whale.
This is the end.
It's the end.
It's the end.
It's the end.
It's the end.